Hi, I'm Dr. Christine Hanlon from the University of Central Florida, here to talk to you about orally citing sources during a presentation. So we have an acronym that was developed by Carol Bledsoe, and Carol Bledsoe was the speech coordinator of the University of Central Florida speech program for many years, decades in fact. She just recently retired, but we still use her Cite acronym when we talk about orally citing sources for speeches. So without further ado, let's talk about the acronym. Number one, how do we orally cite sources? We use the Cite acronym, the CITE acronym. The first thing that we always think about when we orally cite sources during a presentation is we credit the source. And the source is the person who is responsible for that particular information. Sometimes people get a little confused about the source and they think maybe it's the journal article, or it's the name of the journal, or the name of the book, or the name of the website. But the source is the person who developed the information. Ideas come from people. They don't come from books. Books are created by people. Websites are created by people too. So we always want to think about who generated the idea. And the person who generated that idea, that is your source. When we look at a book, sometimes people will cite it by the name of the book. Like I said, this book is called The Girl on the Magazine Cover. It's by Carolyn Kitsch. One of the things that sometimes people don't think about is, the ridiculous, and we think about it as being, why would somebody do this? It would be ridiculous, is citing the library number. So the catalog number where the book is located in the library, you would never cite that, right? Like if you're using this book, would you say, according to P94.5.W652, well, that's just crazy talk, right? Who would do that? But one of the things that we often hear people do is they cite a web address. And a web address, that's just where the information is located online. It's an address, just like this catalog number is the address for where you can find the information, where you can find the book in the library. We don't cite addresses. The source is not an address, it's a person who has generated that idea. Similarly, we would never cite you. So if we were going to cite you, and this is your address, 237 Garden Street, we would say your name. We wouldn't say according to 237 Garden Street. So always remember, you cite the person by name and say their first name and their last name and an appropriate title. So if they have a doctorate, you should be calling them doctor. You should be referring to them as the appropriate title for their position and for how you're using them as an oral citation as well. The second thing, the I in the Cite acronym, is to integrate the source citations throughout. So you want to use the citations throughout your presentation. You want to mention the source and cite them appropriately whenever you mention the data. Sometimes people have a tendency to think about a speech kind of like a written paper, where you'll have like a bibliography section. And no, you don't want to have a bibliography section to your speech. Sometimes I see this integrated as main point number 4, bibliography. Or after the speech, here's my bibliography. These ideas, these people, these sources who you're using should be integrated throughout your speech as you're mentioning them. And ideally, you should have source citations throughout your speech to support each idea that you're talking about. So every main point ideally should have a source citation to support it. You want to make sure that people understand that it's not just you talking about this information, that you've done research and that you've gotten this information from another source who is far more qualified than yourself. It shows the depth of information that you have as a presenter. So we should not have a bibliography like this presented during your speech, and especially not as a 4th main point. That is what we call citation clumping. And beware, beware, beware. You do not want to be a citation clumper. So do keep that in mind. We want to be aware of any citation clumping during your presentation. You don't want to have all the citations all at once. You want to integrate them as it makes sense for your presentation. And you want to cite the sources as you mentioned the data. The third thing is the T in the acronym. That's the take your time. And this is one thing we always talk about with beginning speakers because it's the one big mistake that we see. As public speaking instructors, we often have a requirement that you must have 3 oral citations during your speech type of a thing. So there's a minimum number of oral citations. It's because we want to see you integrating those ideas for your presentation. And so one of the things that the students often do is they think of it, oh, it's a requirement. They don't understand that the importance of the citation is to strengthen your ethos as a speaker and to strengthen your logos. And so they think of it as just a requirement for the speech, a check that they have to complete for their presentation. But really, with a citation helps to strengthen your credibility. It helps to strengthen the depth of the data that you're providing. So really, you should take your time and slow down. And like I said, one of the biggest mistakes we see that students make is they go faster. So they see it as a requirement, so they go quick. They, oh, I got to do this, and they read it off their card real fast. And it's like, no. Slow down. This is the part of the speech when you might want to take a literal step back or a literal step forward and say, so I was speaking to this person, and say their name and their appropriate title, and then explain what information you got from them. Slow down. If you slow down, it indicates that the information is important and that people should listen to that. And the oral citations are really important because they do strengthen your ethos and logos as a presenter. So take your time, take a moment, and slow down when you're saying that information. Beware of rushing through an oral citation. The oral citations are important, and you need to indicate that by slowing down when you're presenting. The last thing is that you want to establish the credentials. So don't just tell us that Dr. Laura Smith said this. Tell us who Dr. Laura Smith is. So give us a little story, do a little storytelling. Tell us Dr. Laura Smith is and tell us what type of a doctor she is. That makes a big difference in terms of the credibility of the information that you're providing. And tell us a story about who they are and why they're important in your presentation. The story doesn't have to be long. It could be just, a couple of sentences that you're stating. But tell us more in depth about who that person is. Oftentimes when I have students present speeches about sports, they'll cite their coach. So Coach Joe. And it's like, well, you need to present it as Coach Joe and then say their last name, or you could just say their name, Joe Smith, who we refer to as Coach Joe. And so I'll refer to them as Coach Joe for the remainder of the speech. That's perfectly fine, right? But then tell us who Coach Joe is. Was Coach Joe just a volunteer for some youth soccer league? Or is Coach Joe some Olympiad, right? Maybe they were on the U.S. women's soccer team. Like, how cool is that? Coach Joe is awesome, right? Brag a little bit about your sources. Tell us why they are experts and why we should listen to what they have to say. Why is their information important? Why are they an expert source for this particular information? So when you're citing your sources, credit your source. Make sure that it's actually the source, the person who generated those ideas. Integrate the source citations throughout, being aware of any kind of citation clumping. Take your time to indicate the importance of the information and make sure that we have the information. Sometimes people run through it so fast we can't even understand what they're talking about. And we can't hear the person's name, so we can't find the information later. And lastly, always establish the credentials of your source. Tell us why they're an expert about that particular information. If you orally cite your sources using these guidelines, you will have an excellent presentation. You will use research as a nice foundation for your speech, and hopefully your audience will benefit accordingly. Have a great presentation.